Welcome to the Dr. Data Show. This is Eric Siegel.
And Luba
and we are here today to do another sort of debunking episode on all the AI hype, and in particular AGI, and more specifically the doomerism, robopocalypse, human extinction, that level of risk, which kind of goes hand in hand with the whole kind of problematic AGI concept in the first place. So, have we got a new bullet point for you? Something that we thought should be amplified from Professor Arvind Narayanan. I haven't said his name out loud too many times, but I've been following him for a long time. He's a computer science professor at Princeton. But first, let's start with the straw man. Let's start with sort of some of the hype, and I'm springing this on Luba. She hasn't heard this. I recently saw Tristan Harris on.
We love Tristan Harris.
Yeah, well, we love in the sense that it's some of the most dramatic statements of hype. He was recently on Real Time with Bill Maher. So let me summarize, Luba, what he said, and hear what your take is on it. And then again, hopefully we're going to begin to address some of this type of hype with what to me was sort of a new bullet point on that. Anyway, Tristan, Bill Maher in general is very much a doomer. Obviously, he's a comedian rather than a machine learning expert, but he's very much like, this stuff's going to all take over and we're all, royally screwed kind of sentiment. He says that a lot. So I'm sure that was influential on his interest in having Tristan Harris. Now, Tristan Harris is an ethicist. He does have a computer science undergraduate degree. I don't know too much about his career in general, but I just know that he's one of those people from time to time who's very successful in his career, at least publicity-wise, on making appearances on things like Bill Maher. And what he said was, and Bill Maher's like, yeah, well, you come on, say whatever you want. If you need to scare the public, we need to scare the public, And Tristan Harris said that, nuclear bombs can destroy humanity. The thing about AI that's different is that it's sort of both the up and downsides at the same time. This is me paraphrasing. That is, it has the potential to destroy humanity just the same as nuclear bombs. And yes, this was kind of said in passing as a given. And yet, it's the same stuff that could also do things like cure cancer. So that's the perplexing dilemma that we have, which is that, we're trying to wrangle with this thing that has both the best upside and the best downside at the same time. And then he made sort of posed as an argument for why we're headed towards the supreme power that's implied with the concept of AGI by saying, look, all these billions of dollars, these companies like OpenAI, the only way the economics are going to work is if they get to AGI, because right now, you get these subscriptions and a bunch of revenue from enterprises, but doesn't anywhere match the investment that's gone into the stuff, into the, multimodal large language models and all the related technologies and developments around that. The only way this is going to work is if they get to their stated, in the case of OpenAI, very much stated goal. Same thing with Anthropic. I don't know if it's listed as their enterprise goal on their website, but we know from the CEO very much believing in the AGI concept, or at least purportedly, and that the economics are going to only work if they can get there and get that supreme level of power and capability. And there's only going to be a small number of winners, because once you get there, right, you just sort of have the power over everybody else. It's this supreme power. So he poses that as if it's an argument that we're going to, by unveiling the fact that they need to get there, and therefore that's where we're headed. They necessarily have that as a goal, which means
they will get there.
Which means they will get there because they're big and they've got a lot of money, and that's the goal. Without any sense of like, wait a minute, is this a feasible goal? Is it a well-defined goal? Is it a meaningful goal? So sort of two parts there in what, in my paraphrase, what Tristan Harris said. One is sort of in passing mentioning that, well, it's just as dangerous as nuclear bombs. And the other is saying, obviously we're going to get there because that's the only way to make the economics work.
So it kind of is in line with if we throw enough data at it, if we throw enough compute at it, if we throw enough money at it.
Yeah,
we will get there, even though what there is. I mean, he's defining it well. He's defining it as the robocopolis. I can't even say
Robopocalypse.
Yeah, I was practicing that in my head after you said it. Robocopolypse.
Now, it's a portmanteau of robot and apocalypse.
And cop. There's a cop in it.
Yeah, I mean, you can cop a plea and admit that this is all baloney, for example, if that's what you mean by cop. But yeah, Robopocalypse was the name of a movie that at one point Steven Spielberg was set to direct. Based on the novel. Unfortunately, it just doesn't look like that movie's happening last I checked. Anyway, that's an aside.
But it might be happening in real life.
But this sense that, hey, they've got enough money. The psychology there is they're like, well, of course they're going to get it because they want it, because they need it, because they're doing it. And this sort of sense of them, right? And it feels very much the same psychology of, even well before the current AI hype wave, there's a tendency for the general public to roll their eyes and say, oh, the government's spying on us. Oh, they have all this power. Oh, they can predict everything I'm about to do. That sort of they thing where it's just like there's this deep state feeling of like these
us
huge
them.
forces and unbelievable power. And, they know that there's really aliens from other planets that have visited the Earth. And it's very much conspiracy theory type of thinking, or at least a good step in that direction, right? And I've always sort of compared the belief that technological progress is actually headed towards AGI. I've always viewed that as if not a conspiracy theory, definitely a conspiracy theory adjacent. There's similar psychology. But anyway, so that's sort of an interjection. Did you have anything else to say about, or what would be off your cuff debunking when you hear somebody say, well, obviously it's just as dangerous as nuclear bombs and they're necessarily pursuing it, so it's happening.
Right. Well, I think it's interesting. I think it's good to decouple the two ideas of AGI and robocopolypse.
Robopocalypse.
That yes, that it's people are sort of fusing the two together, and if something becomes intelligent enough on the spectrum of intelligence, it will supersede humans, and then we will become the slaves to the system, and it will dominate the world, and that will be the end. It will take over.
Yeah.
I think it's one jump to AGI, and it's another huge second leap to the idea that it will take over the world.
Well, okay, look, in that science fiction premise that we get to AGI, that is the machine is as capable as the best person on any particular task. I think that if you put on your science fiction writer hat, right, and you're in that sort of ultimate anthropomorphization of any artifact other than people, right? It's easy to anthropomorphize people.
Yeah.
I anthropomorphize you all the time, right? I mean, but if you try to apply that psychology of this is anthropomorphic to anything other than a person, like cartoons do with animals, or like science fiction does with machines, once you've achieved that ultimate level of it, and it's really human level capable, I think that in the science fiction conceit, which is problematic, right? It's sort of a leap of faith. It's a suspension of disbelief, and it's fun in the context of movies. But within that conceit, then it does instantly become super intelligent because the machine can be reproduced. It's extremely inexpensive compared to people. it can be faster, and it can go faster and faster, and in that way technology does progress for sure.
So in your mind, that second leap is smaller.
So and it can conduct AI research the same as people, and then but do so
on people
well, no, on itself or whatever, but it can do so indefinitely faster because it's just always self-improving, and there can be as many of it as you want, essentially. So I think that once you get to AGI, right, the Skynet's the limit, so to speak, right? I mean, it's in the science. So I think that there's not a big difference between believing in the AGI concept, and that when you hear people like Tristan Harris, who tends to focus more on the doomerism, and Nick Bostrom, who wrote the superintelligence book, they're all both boosters and doomers at the same time. And boosterism and doomerism always go hand in hand, right? I mean, if it can destroy the world, it can probably also do a pretty good job targeting your marketing, right? So to the degree that it's ultimately powerful, it's intimidating, and we should bow to it, and we should also buy it, right? I mean, so these two sides, I mean, and I didn't coin this term, but there's a term criti-hype, where if it's where you're posing it as a criticism, but in so doing you're actually boosting it, you're hyping it. But what do you say just to that sentiment? And I feel that it's unfortunately seems very effective from publicity standpoint, and where he kind of mentions in a low tone, offhandedly, well, as a granted, obviously it can be as potentially dangerous as nuclear weapons, and that's just sort of a given at this point among the believers, among people like him, and in this case his audience, Bill Maher, who's and then Bill Maher's audience, I don't know, but I'm sure some of them, based on the sounds of the audience. So just that's a given. It's just like, yeah, this, of course it's happening, right? I mean, and I heard a lot of other doomers say, well, oh yeah, like Sam, the other Sam, not Sam, the thought leader,
Harris.
Yeah, Sam Harris. He says, well, certainly, like that's how he starts, and when he talks about this topic, he just kind of says, well, obviously it's going to become, there's no question it'll become human level. So there's so many believers and doomers out there that start with that premise, and it's not even worth considering as a point of debate. It's just a given.
Right.
Which is just, let me say this, that's crazy.
Or as Mikolai would say, that's so crazy.
That Mikolai. So, ladies and gentlemen, Luba and I are married, and she's referring to our younger 3-year-old son. So, okay. In any case,
that's so crazy.
That's so crazy. Right, but yes, but he usually means crazy in a good way.
Yes.
And that's not what we're talking about here.
No, crazy bad. Well, I wonder. I'm wondering if Jan LeCun's idea of superhuman adaptable intelligence fits into this as well. His whole argument is that LLMs aren't going to get us there, but superhuman adaptable intelligence.
No, that concept that we covered in a previous episode of superhuman adaptable intelligence is sort of the antidote to this AGI thinking, because he's not espousing a singular solution that's just extraordinarily horizontal.
But what if
he's talking about a general system, paradigm, research process, whatever you want to call it, that has the capability and is constantly improving its capacity to do narrow AI, right? Just solve one particular problem at a time and delve into it and get to the point where it can adapt to being at least as good as a human on that one particular task.
Right.
And that adaptation is quicker and quicker. Like, that's the name of the game, right? But he and his co-authors of that, right, are not espousing AGI. It's an antidote.
They're not, but could a doomer come by and spin that into the same narrative. Possibly. They
Well,
could
yeah,
join
I mean,
forces and
yeah, there's semantics. You can twist the human language, and you can say, "Oh no, it's And again, that's part of the problem with that particular. If the concept's an antidote, the terminology maybe doesn't serve so well as an antidote. Superhuman, adaptable, intelligence sounds hypey as heck if you don't really unpack it, right?
But speaking more broadly, if LLMs don't get us there, they're saying, well, we'll find another
right. No,
another
that's the
way.
general.
Yeah.
That's been the same.
The macro perspective,
Right, one of the most well-known, visible, publicity-wise, anti-hype people is Marcus. Oh darn it, what's his name?
Aurelius.
No, Gary Marcus. And Gary Marcus wrote a book before the current AI hype wave, before the advent of LLMs. And the first half of the book debunks the AI hype, and the second half is like, all we have to do is combine symbolic, or some. When we get the right combination between symbolic and quantitative or neural networks or machine learning, that's when we're going to get AGI. So he's still, and I think that's pretty common. We're sort of like this sort of realism of like, well, LLMs, they're assumingly human-like as they are, they're not necessarily. They're almost definitely not heading us towards general human level capabilities.
But something
else will.
Yeah.
And of course that's going to be a pretty common line of thought, even when people get realistic about LLMs in particular, because that's always been the whole point. That's what the term AI is meant in its full manifestation, and the spirit and intention of the term is meant to be AGI. Since the inception of the term in the 50s, that's the AI that we all dream about and that we enjoy in science fiction movies, right? So, yes. So there's a lot of different levels of quote unquote believer, right? But Professor Arvind Narayanan, I'm sorry, I can't say your name too well. Narayanan.
It's okay. Eric's still working on my last name.
Yeah, and I can say Robopocalypse.
Yeah, that's true. You had a lot more practice.
True. In my dreams. So this Princeton professor, right? He's very much also speaking out against the concept of AGI, and basically says it's not a coherent concept. He puts it that way. It's not a coherent concept, and starts out. And so this portion that I'm going to summarize is from an interview with Adam Conover. Yeah, it's called Factually. It's his podcast. Adam Conover is a comedian who used to do Adam Ruins Everything. In any case, this overall is a really good interview, and the quotes from around 25 minutes in, if you want to find the actual full podcast. I think it's worth amplification. Adam Conover says, hey, what about all this Robopocalypse existential risk stuff? And he essentially says he vehemently disagrees with it. He questions whether superintelligence is a coherent concept and says, well, okay, it presumes that intelligence is a one-dimensional thing along which you're improving, which is true for certain narrow AI tasks like, let's say, chess, but does that apply in general? Does it apply for real-world projects and industry needs? And does it apply with regard to this analysis of whether we would potentially lose control of AI? And this is the part, and that stuff, that's also similar to, as you said to me offline, stuff that I've been writing, is like, that's the myth of approaching AGI, is this presumption that AI, that intelligence is a one-dimensional concept, and better means, quote, smarter, and we're progressing along it, and then we'll get to and then surpass human capabilities as if it's just one dimension, which is pretty nonsensical, actually. But in any case, this is the point where he makes a point that I hadn't really heard said, and I hadn't really come across before, which is that most real world tasks are not computationally bottlenecked. That is to say, it's not just the amount of computation that have the issue, and in other words, that the biology of what humans can do isn't the limiting factor, but rather that the problem is either inherently hard or that we lack certain knowledge about how the world works to better solve the problem, and therefore machines will lack the same info. Now, of course, a machine that's really capable of gathering new info, potentially could surpass human knowledge. But then, for example, there's still bottlenecks in acquiring new knowledge that the machine would come against just the same as humans. So he gives an example of, okay, what about for medical knowledge? If you want some super intelligent, doctor or what have you, well, if you allow the computer to do autonomous experimentation, what does that mean? That means it's doing treatment controls, experiments on real humans to ascertain medical outcome. And that, of course, is very much up against certain practical and ethical limitations, just the same as humans. So he just sort of points out, look, there are sort of limits just because problems are just sort of intrinsically hard, or there's a lack of knowledge that's intrinsically inaccessible. So the machine's sort of stuck, and the notion of it coming to and then exceeding human capabilities is just sort of, there's a real credibility question. So that bullet, I feel, really deserves amplification. It's relatively buried, right? We're talking about a podcast that, for example, on YouTube, the episodes received 31,000 views, but this is 25 minutes in. So relative to all the sort of, let's call it noise, the incredible hype machine that media is helping perpetuate, the awe people have in the amount of money that is under the control of these investments, the power, the visibility, the sexiness of human-like LLMs, and the real value that they certainly do have, albeit maybe very small compared to the story being told. All of this sort of amounts to an overwhelming hype message. So we're trying to amplify this. So any thoughts there on that basic point that Professor Narayanan from Princeton has stated? And he, by the way, is the co-author with his PhD student of AI snake oil. So they're doing a certain amount in general to quash the hype.
Yeah, I love the point about our abilities not being limited due to a computational bottleneck.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought of it more broadly as it's not limited due to an information bottleneck either. These are just at this point these are just information aggregators.
Yeah.
And that's
right, and that goes along.
Yeah.
There's a musician, YouTuber I like to follow, and he made this great point recently. I mentioned to you the other day or the other week, where he's like, "Look, he had a conversation with ChatGPT on his on his YouTube channel, and he kind of says, "Hey, look, how do you do sound engineering for this type of situation with these instruments?" And it was very impressive what it would come up with. But then he made the point, like, okay, look, it has a lot of knowledge about sound engineering, but the creme de la creme of sound engineers, there's a handful of them, and I'm speaking as him, the musician, and I know a lot of these best ever sound engineers in the world, and I know for a fact that many or most of them have never done detailed public interviews. So there's no way that the training data is just not available for the LLM. Like, there's no way it's going to know that level of info. So yes, it's sort of, there's like knowledge aggregation. There's the ability to synthesize it to a certain degree extremely well, but there's also just sort of intrinsically these limits on knowledge that the machines very much share with humans.
Right. Yeah, it's yeah, I think it's a great point that those are not the actual challenges that we're encountering. And in fact, I think in some of these problems that you describe as inherently hard, I like to think that there's a certain level of secret sauce or art that is required to surpass those inherently hard challenges or knowledge bottlenecks.
Yeah. Well, so one of the main examples that comes to my mind in this notion of, regardless of like, so he sort of lists these two main things. One is some things are sort of inherently hard, and we're unable to solve them not because of limitations of the human brain, but because in some sense they're intrinsically hard. And then the other part, he says there's bottlenecks to knowledge, attaining knowledge or additional knowledge. In the first of those two, intrinsically hard, what I come to is like, what's the name of the game with most predictive AI projects? Predicting the outcome or behavior for each individual. Who's going to click, buy, lie, or die, commit an act of fraud, turn out to be a bad debtor, which machine's going to break down. And as I've said before, those outcomes, we do not have a magic crystal ball. And we have the next best thing, which is putting odds or probability levels, predictive scores, on each individual potential outcome for each individual case. And that's the best we can do. And as the technology improves, the analytical approach, that is to say, if you went to use a full-fledged large language model under the hood to help with the prediction, there's very much extremely diminishing returns. And that, yeah, you might be able to do a little bit better, predicting a little bit better, but not that much better. There's still a hard limit. There's a ceiling. We don't have a magic crystal ball, and all the technology in the world is not going to change that. CF chaos theory, right? All we have are odds, and we can calculate odds maybe a little bit better with a much more sophisticated approach. But qualitatively, that fundamental is just not going to change. We can only predict better than guessing, or sometimes you can predict very well, right? Is this a picture of a cat or a dog, right? Just the same as humans can. Some problems are not inherently hard, but for outcomes, for predicting the future, or these kinds of outcomes that are typical for enterprise projects for predictive AI, and for many other things you might want to predict in your life, love and death and all that kind of stuff, when and if it's going to happen, right? It's just odds. There's too many factors. There's no such thing as a magic crystal ball or any technological equivalent. So in that way, his point very much applies there to many of the sort of large scale things that we would love machines to be able to help us with, and that they do help us with very much to a certain degree, but not. There's no holy grail.
Right. And that sort of the next level beyond what we're looking at having machines tackle right now, sort of the pinnacle of what humans are creating or advancing in is more than just an accumulation of facts, regurgitation of information, or surpassed by throwing massive compute and billions of dollars at it. What this reminds me of is a philosopher and I guess a learning theorist named Josh Waitzkin, who stresses that it's more than just the integration of skills and information. You integrate it to the point where it becomes part of your being and part of your subconscious, and you create what you create on that higher level is something that I don't think machines will ever be able to achieve.
What you create, sorry, I didn't quite follow. So is this a self-improvement kind of guru type
No.
of guy? Like I'm sorry, what are we talking
No, just
about?
learning in general, any sort of task. He's a chess prodigy,
Okay.
of course, but now machines can do chess. But also martial arts and just general theories about learning, human learning in general. What does it mean to be a creative individual on a human level, not
Okay.
on a machine level?
Yeah.
And I think he speaks to a certain level of human creativity or human productivity that machines will never be able to achieve.
Oh, okay. And so,
The secret sauce.
So he's not just talking about humanity, he also conjectures about limits of machines.
No.
He doesn't.
I'm throwing that in there.
You're conjecturing about limits of machines.
I'm conjecturing, yes. I'm throwing that in
So
there.
I like the concept. I just fear that those ideas like machines will never be truly creative. That's a specifically human. I feel I always I think there's a certain truth in there somewhere, but I also think that line of reasoning does not help the debate, right? The debate tends to be pretty bifurcated. You've got believers and non-believers. You've got people that are kind of like, they're sort of, just like cold. It's sort of this hard, cold look at like, well, the brain is just conducting some kind of algorithm, and so ultimately, why couldn't a machine do it? And I don't disparage that. I think that there's a lot of truth to that, and I don't think that I don't necessarily hold that theoretically a computer could never do what a brain could do. It's just a question of how do you program the computer. You can only get computers to do something that's been explicitly programmed, and that's the bottleneck, right? A very real, practical, impenetrable bottleneck.
So you're saying the algorithm is designing the algorithm.
Yeah, telling the computer what to do or telling it how to figure out what to do, right? Machine learning. Mm-hmm. There's no reason to believe that's going to start approaching the particular capabilities of general human capabilities. I don't want to use the word intelligence because it doesn't help the conversation. It's subjective. So if it's kind of bifurcated, people on that side are just sort of like, well, of course we can eventually get machines to do what the brain does. If that sort of sentiment of like, there's creativity and it's intrinsically human or inherently human and in that way uniquely human, I don't think that helps. I don't mind the sentiment, but I don't think it helps the debate, because I think that the purpose of the debate is to try to help ease the intensity of the believers, because that's what's leading to the hype, and the hype is bad for everybody, right? It's going to lead to disillusionment, the difference between what's plausible and what's promised, right? It's not, it can be fun and euphoric in the moment to get all excited about, but I already think it's exciting enough. I mean, what deep learning was capable of doing, like, these things are really cool. Being able to actually fully replicate what the mind does, or at least not necessarily how it works, but maybe that, but also at least what it's capable in the full reaches horizontally of what's capable of. That's so fantastical. And maybe it'll happen in a few thousand years. But right now there's no particular path to that or notion of how to do it.
Because we don't really understand the full picture of what.
No, of course not.
Right.
I mean, so introspection.
There's no end goal, well-defined end goal.
No, I mean, I learned that in 1989. Introspection, right? Thinking about how you think, right? That's symbolic AI. That's what you're trying to replicate it, either by reasoning about it or even experiencing it introspectively. The phenomenology would be the word they would use, right? It's so limited. You don't know how you think, right? We can't understand our own understanding. And also, how do you measure the horizontal range of just our pure capabilities? What does it mean? How do you define it?
I think that's the more tangible point there. What is that one-dimensional spectrum?
And there's one other thing we've never really mentioned, which is that in addition to just sort of pure, if there was a way to formalize and measure capability, and you get a machine to continually get closer to some definition of the wide horizontal range of human capabilities, and some kind of AGI in that respect, there's also the question of our willingness to allow the computer control, right? To give it autonomy, to grant it autonomy. And I mean, which is problematic because then there's no accountability, right? I mean, to the degree machines are given a little bit too much control, then they make an error, and then we very quickly backpedal and we diminish the extent of control, which includes, for example, self-driving cars, right? Right now you've got a person supervising it, and there's a lot of tension around that and the degree to which, well,
or limited geographies.
We know the person.
Released.
We know the person can't go. Limited geographies. We know the person can't go to sleep in the back of the car for most uses in general. So they're supposed to be keeping an eye on the road, but is it okay for them to be texting some? Right? These are controversial because we're on the edge of trying to figure out the degree of autonomy. But ultimately, right, truly autonomous general driving does seem attainable to me maybe a few decades, right? That's not nearly the same ambition as this notion of AGI, right? Which is just such a bigger ambition. So I think we've sort of done our job on this episode, which is if our job was to help amplify that point. But let me just add one more sort of practical question and bounce this off you related to that. That kind of point of like, well, what is it a coherent concept of AGI? What are the real bottlenecks? Doesn't any machine face the same bottlenecks essentially for the most part that humanity does in terms of solving problems? I feel that that's really potent in sort of tackling the mismanaged expectations and overpromising of the hype. But I also can't help but always coming back to sort of also trying to understand the psychology of the believers, of the boosters. The basic sort of feeling of like, hey, there's going to be this tipping point singularity threshold where it gets intelligent enough and then it catches wildfire because it can improve its own intelligence and sort of somehow caught the core essence of quote unquote intelligence, and it's in the machine, and now it's capable of just sort of self-improving along so many dimensions all at once with all of the upsides of what computers can do, which is, run infinitely without needing to take a break and all that, and can replicate and be less expensive and much more fast than humans. So tell me this. What do you think of that, though? I mean, because what we've been saying up till now today is like, hey, where's the logical coherence? Let's just reason about this from first principles of where the limits, why the limits that apply to humans also apply to our machines. But I think that that's sort of maybe the best faith argument, but it may not be the most effective because the believers are going to always find some rationalization, some way of explaining this feeling of like awesome, hit the intelligence tipping point, and then it explodes in intelligence. And that underlies most of the narratives around the AGI story. And so on the one hand, what I'm proposing here of like unpacking the psychology of believers may be more potent and helpful to sort of help approach and extinguish and express more widely to the general public the problems with and source of that unwieldy, ambitious belief system. But it's also a little bit condescending what I'm saying. I'm like, yeah, all you believers, you have a psychological, and it is what I'm saying.
Us versus them mentality.
Yeah. Well, let me finish saying and then come back to what you just said.
Yeah.
Right? I'm saying you have a psychological fallacy. You have a propensity, and it's, I have to say, quite parallel to sort of certain religious beliefs, but you have a propensity to sort of latch on to this notion that there's some platonic ideal of intelligence existing outside humans, right, where I would counter-argue and say that intelligence is only a very specific and subjective concept pertaining particularly to humans, but that this concept somehow exists in a platonic world outside humanity, and that if we can just attain it, just kind of get ingredients X, Y, Z in terms of the quote-unquote general common sense reasoning, which is just as subjective and is essentially synonymous to the concept of intelligence. But then somehow that's going to be encapsulated algorithmically. The machine's going to catch wildfire. There's a tipping point, right? It's an intelligence explosion, a singularity. There's a lot of different words for it. But that whether you're thinking of it consciously or not, and whatever word you might have for it, that the believers tend to latch on to that and see that sci-fi kind of thing happen, and and it's essentially that story could only hold true if there were somehow a platonic ideal of intelligence outside of humanity, where kind of once you get it, then it starts to be kind of very broadly capable and capable of improving its own capabilities. Right. So am I being us versus them? Am I being pedantic and condescending, or am I right, or both? Great. So I can't win, right? Yeah. The only way I can be right is to be condescending. How are we going to, like, there's two ways to win this battle, and I fear the second way is the only way we're going to win. The first way is to do what I'm doing now, which is very well intentioned and sincere, which is like, I think people have a psychological fallacy in their belief system and their line of reasoning. The other way is to wait and watch AI fail, right? Hit the next AI winter.
Yeah, please, can we get the winner? Give us the winner.
Well, I don't want it. We don't. That's like wishing for an economic recession because it'll get the other political party elected, right? Like, it's not.
It's long overdue.
I don't know if that's good-willed exactly, but so that's why I say I fear that the second of those, that some kind of powerful disillusionment.
Yeah, a shock to the. We need a shock to the system. That's what machine learning systems every now and again need as well. We get trapped in the local minima, and we just need to be shocked out of it to get to the glow.
Right.
Maximum,
I mean, and that's just the notion. That's very much linked to the notion of the need for diversity in the genetic pool, right? I mean, so I think that calling it a neural network is a really bad idea because it's making a much stronger comparison to humans, or to biological networks, and similarly, people are always like, look, computers should be able to learn because even look how fast a kid can learn. My toddler learned XYZ overnight or whatever it is. But I think the analogy there is wrong. You don't compare machine learning to an individual human's or child's learning. No. Compare machine learning to the evolution of humanity. That was a learning process. And the one that led to this one very particular type of organism that we are, right? That has this wide, arcane range of very particular skills, right?
Well, I think that's what, in part, is frightening for the doomers, is that we know how long it's taken humanity to get to where we are right now. And now we're seeing things happen very quickly for machines and for AI. And at the same time, and this is something that makes it so palatable for the masses, is that and this was hinted upon or talked about in the Factually podcast, is that there's been a slowdown, especially in America, in terms of our progress. And there are a lot of things that are going wrong in our society, economy, and democracy, and people are scared. Yeah. And there's this fear.
Well, there's a propensity to fear when you're just a citizen, and there's much bigger powers in the form of corporations and governments.
There's a sense of loss of control.
Yeah.
And that's feeding into that.
So that's part of the psychology, but the psychology that I'm criticizing, I feel, is prevalent among techies who feel relatively empowered or feel relatively optimistic about their career. Maybe they're younger, they're very technically competent, they understand the idea of an algorithm and a computer program, and which are two very tightly coupled but not exactly the same concepts. But yeah, in terms of But both sides of that, whether it's coming out of fear or just sort of euphoric enthusiasm, both sides are very much fed by the apparently extremely fast, disruptive pace of LLMs. Now, LLMs definitely emerged and were developed over many more years than most people realize, including just the general computational linguistics movement. But then even large language models in particular maybe took a little longer, but relatively speaking, extremely fast. And the way I would describe that is, okay, look, there's this one tremendous data set, which is all the human writing ever done. And from that, predicting the next word or token, you can emerge from that, right? Huge models that in a sense have a great encoding of words and phrases and paragraphs and documents in terms of their quote unquote meaning, not at the level of what humans can do, but something a step further in that, much further in that direction than it's ever been done before. Mm-hmm. And then leveraging that particular learning training data set, once you can leverage it, then it's all going to happen really quite quickly, because machine learning is an algorithm, so the machine can do it, right? So until relatively recently, we had that data set, or a lot of it, but we couldn't, or that training data set, but we couldn't leverage it because there were certain bottlenecks in how well neural networks work. So there was a few key technical innovations as well as improved hardware. So suddenly, relatively speaking, we could leverage it. We could train models on that unprecedented data set, and all at once, and relatively. So that's the huge ramp up. But now we've done it. We've made use. We've in a sense reverse engineered a certain amount of human capabilities based on that data set, and now there's going to be diminishing returns because the technology is getting better, but the overall data set is not getting much better than what we have now.
Right, but the problem is the public is not.
They don't know
aware of that.
Oh no, definitely not.
Which is why we're here.
Okay, yeah. Listen to this. I mean, that.
Yeah.
What we already said.
Yeah, all that.
So, yeah. So, I mean, look, I don't know. I mean, if there's something true about a human propensity to misbelieve, to believe something false, there has got to be a way to point it out. And maybe without being condescending. And maybe I failed to do so today, but at least I made a first try. So I don't think it has to be a losing battle. I think that it's possible to frame the point that's so rarely stated publicly in a way that's constructive.
Yeah.
So let's keep working
doing
on that.
Yeah. And having a good time, laughing.
Laughing
about doomsday, laughing about the robo-apocalypse.
Robopocalypse.
POC. It's not cop. It's
No.
cop backwards. That's what was messing me up.
POC.
Apocalypse.
Yeah, like apocalypse.
I did it.
Wait, say it again?
Robopocalypse.
Great. Okay.
Mission accomplished.
Great. So if the movie comes out, it's a date.
See you then.
See you there. All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode of
Dr. Data Show with Luba Glukova and
Eric Siegel.
woohoo.